This is part 2 of this 3-part series of making the Sub-Zero Kids sweater in size 8. In part 1, we worked on the lower body and the front of the sweater, including the neck detail. And in part 2, we're going to work the front neck shaping, some short row shaping on that front shoulder, and pick up from the back where we had put our stitches on hold. We will continue on with the back armhole shaping, work our way up to the shoulders, and do some short row shaping along these shoulders. We're going to also bind off, we'll do a 3-needle bind off to join those shoulders. The first thing we're going to do is knit to the first marker. We're going to bind off the center 11 neck stitches. We're going to make sure these get transferred to scrap yarn as well. And then we're going to knit to the end of this row. I don't need the marker anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And I want to bind off those center 11 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and one more. Okay, now we've got the center neck stitches bound off. And we're going to knit to the end of the row. Now we have the stitches here for the left shoulder, the bound off stitches for the center of the neck, and then the stitches for the right shoulder. You have the option of transferring these stitches for the left shoulder, of transferring them to some scrap yarn or a stitch holder so that you can work on them later. I'm going to leave mine on my cable needle because they don't bother me. I'm going to continue working on the right shoulder. And we're going to continue shaping the neck for a couple more rows, and then we'll shape the shoulders. We're going to purl across the next row. The next step of the neck shaping is we're going to bind off 4 stitches and then continue with the purl 1, knit 1 to the end. Again, you want to remember to make sure that your purl columns are lining up properly. Now let's bind off these stitches. I slipped that first stitch just to give it a bit of a nicer appearance. You don't have to do that. That was 2, 3, and one more. And now we'll continue with the purl 1, knit 1 to the end of the row. Next row, purl across. Next row of the neck shaping is decreasing 1 stitch at the neck edge and knitting to the end of the row. So we'll do an SSK. That will give us a left leaning decrease. And we'll knit to the end of the row. Next row we'll purl across. And for the last row of neck shaping, we will once again decrease 1 stitch at the neck edge. We'll do a SSK, which is the slip slip knit. And then since this is the knit 1 purl 1 row, we will follow where our column of purls are, and we'll do the purl 1, knit 1 to the end of the row. And then just 1 row of purl, and then we'll start the shoulder shaping. Slip slip knit, and we will knit to the last 6 stitches. And we'll wrap and turn. We'll purl across. And then on the next right side row, we'll knit across the entire row and hide that gap as we come to it, the gap that forms where we did our short row. And since this is the last shoulder row, I'm not going to do the knit 1 purl 1 bumps like I would normally if this were a full row. So we'll just knit across and close this gap. See the wrap right here? And that's it for the right shoulder. I'm going to transfer these stitches to some scrap yarn so that I can work on the left shoulder. To work the left side, we're going to join the new yarn to the right side of the work and knit across. Next row, we'll bind off 4 stitches at the neck edge and then knit 1, purl 1 to the end. And if you remember from last time, I just slipped that first stitch at the edge just to make a smoother transition. We'll bind off 1, 2, 3, 4, and knit 1, purl 1 till the end. Next row, we'll just knit across. Next row is purl 2 together and purl across. Next row, knit across. Next row, purl 2 together and then knit 1, purl 1 to the end. Next row, knit across, and then we will do the last decrease for the neck shaping as well as the shoulder shaping. Purl 2 together and then purl to the last 6 stitches. We'll do a wrap and turn. Turn the work, move the yarn to the back, and knit across. Our very last row will be a wrong side row, and we're going to work our way all the way across and close this gap as we come to it. See the wrap over here. Gonna lift it up and over. Get these 2 back onto the left-hand needle, and then I'm going to purl these 2 together through the back loop and purl the rest of the way. And that is the left shoulder of the sweater. We'll need to transfer these back stitches onto a working needle. And so this will again be the larger size needle that we've been working with for the body. And we're going to transfer all of these stitches onto the needle. So we'll join the yarn to the wrong side. And purl across. And after this row, we're going to do the decreases at each armhole edge, just like we did for the front. We'll decrease 1 stitch at each armhole edge. And this row happens to be the row where we need to continue our purl bumps. So we'll do the SSK to decrease 1 stitch at the armhole edge, and purl 1, knit 1 to the last 3 stitches. And when you get to the last 3 stitches, you purl 1 and knit 2 together. Next row, we're going to purl across. The next row, we're going to once again decrease 1 stitch at each armhole edge, and this is a row where we need to do the purl bumps. So we're going to do the SSK, which is the slip slip knit, and since this is the column I have with the purl bumps, I'm going to purl 1, knit 1 all the way across the row till the last 3 stitches of this row. When you get to the last 3 stitches, you're going to purl 1 and knit 2 together. In the next row, we're just going to purl across. Now that we're done working the armhole decreases for the back of the sweater, we're going to continue this 4-row repeat that we've been doing for the body. So work these 4 rows 9 times. And then we will begin the neck and shoulder shaping. We've now finished working the back of the sweater, and we're going to begin shaping the shoulders. We're going to be doing that with short rows, so after I finished working the 4-row repeat for the body, I did knit 1 row, and I'm on my way back, just purling back on this row, and I'm going to end 6 stitches before the end of the row. Okay, so I'm purling to the last 6 stitches. And I'm going to wrap and turn. I'm going to wrap the stitch, slip the stitch back, and turn. And now going back to the other side to the last 6 stitches, we're coming upon a row where I've got to do my knit 1, purl 1, so I'm going to follow the column with purl bumps. My next stitch is a knit stitch, and I'm going to do the knit 1, purl 1 all the way across the row to the last 6 stitches. And we'll again do a wrap and turn. We'll do a wrap and turn. And now we're going to just purl all the way to the end of the row and close this gap as we come to it. That was where we wrapped and turned in the last row. So we're just going to purl across to the end of the row and close that gap when we get there. And that wrap is right here. What I want to do is lift it up, and I'm going to lift it up and over, and then I'm going to slip those two back to the left hand needle, and I'm going to purl these two stitches together through the back loop and just snug it up and continue knitting to the end of the row. Turn the work and go ahead and knit all the way to the end of this row and close this gap as we're coming by it. And here's where we can do some of the back neck shaping. Is you've got two options here. You can bind off the center 25 stitches, or you can leave them live. Just knit across and leave them as live stitches. What that will do, if you decide to leave live stitches, sometimes that can be helpful if you think you might, you know, like if you have a really tight bind off, or if you think the person wearing the sweater might have trouble getting the collar over their head, you might want to consider leaving live stitches. But the front of my sweater is pretty stretchy, and I think that I'm making a size that's a little bit larger than the child who will be wearing it. So I think I'm going to bind off the center 25 because I don't think we'll have any trouble getting the sweater over his head. I've bound off the center 25 stitches. I have 12 stitches left for the shoulder, and I'm going to just knit across and close this little gap where we did our first short row. I want to hide the wrap. I'm going to bring it up and over, and I'm going to knit two together here. And that's it for the back shoulders. The next thing we want to do is a 3 needle bind off, and we're going to do that to join the shoulder stitches together. So we've got the shoulder stitches of the back of the sweater and a set of shoulder stitches from the front of the sweater. We're going to want them right sides facing. And to do the 3 needle bind off, we're going to need needles, because so we're going to transfer the stitches of one set of shoulder stitches to one needle and the other set of shoulder stitches to the other needle, and we want them both facing the same way, the same direction. And we're going to need a spare needle. All right, I've got both sets of shoulder stitches on my needles. I'm going to use the tail, the long tail that I left from when I was doing the shoulder shaping. I'm going to scrunch those up near the ends of the needle, not too far, I don't want to lose any stitches. We'll have the spare needle, and what we're going to do is use the spare needle, insert it knitwise through the front leg of the first stitch on the first needle and through the front leg of the first stitch on the second needle. Okay, you want to make sure you don't insert it through you know, between stitches. You don't want to do that because then your stitches, the stitch will unravel. So through knitwise through the first stitch on the first needle and through the first stitch on the second needle. And we're going to knit those 2 stitches together and slip them off the left-hand needles. Repeat that step through the front leg of the first stitch on the first needle, through the front leg of the first stitch on the second needle, knit those 2 together, slip them off, and then use the tip of a left-hand needle to bind off. And we'll do that all the way across. Through the first stitch of the first needle, through the first stitch of the second needle, knit those 2 together, use the tip of the left-hand needle to bind off. I like doing 3 needle bind offs versus just grafting shoulders together because for my sweaters at least, I like having a little bit of structure in the sweater. You know, a whole sweater hangs on just the shoulder seams. So I really like giving my sweaters a little bit more structure in the form of, you know, what's basically a kind of seam. I find that it just helps the sweaters stand up a little better over time. And then the last stitch, we're going to bind off, and we'll just fasten this off like we normally would. And there we have a shoulder join. So here's the sweater right side out. We've got our shoulder joins. Look pretty nice. And ready for some sleeves.